shuffle into the shop just before twilight, boots caked with the sticky dust of cobbled alleys. The door creaks as it opens, a tin bell overhead jangling like it too is tired of announcing guests. The smell hits you first, sharp lye soap, candle wax, a hint of old blood that never quite leaves the cracks in the floorboards. The room is narrow, wooden panels darkened by decades of steam, tobacco, and whispered secrets. Against the far wall stands a tall, striped pole, red and white, spiraling forever upward like a candy cane made from bone and breath. It turns lazily, not for show, but because something inside is still wound too tight to stop. You've seen that pole outside barbershops all your life, never really thought about why it's there. Now you know. The red, blood. The white, bandages. The pole itself. The staff are patient-gripped while their barber, eyes calm and fingers sure, sliced into a vein and let the sickness spill out. Bloodletting, they called it, a cure for nearly everything. Fever, madness, sins you couldn't name aloud. The pole is a remnant, a whisper of that ritual. And it turns, slowly, like the earth does when you close your eyes and forget where your feet are. You take a seat in the worn leather chair, still warm from the last visitor. There's no mirror. Not here. Mirrors are for beauty, and this place isn't for that. This is a place of function, of necessity. The kind of room you find yourself in when you've run out of places to pretend you're fine. A man appears from behind the curtain. His apron is stained in that indeterminate way where you can't tell what's soap and what's something older. He smiles kindly but without softness. He knows things, has seen the inside of too many mouths, too many bodies, to flinch anymore. His hands are steady, his eyes tired but awake. You glance toward the side table. Laid out like sacred relics are his tools, a gleaming razor, curved just enough to suggest elegance, a pair of scissors with bone handles, a hook that probably isn't for fishing, but you'd rather not ask. A porcelain bowl, half filled with water and something darker. It glints red when the candlelight catches it. Before he says a word, he reaches into a small brass holder and removes a rolled cloth. He unrolls it, and out tumble things that are not for hair. Metal clamps, a small chisel, a silver lancet. He picks one up and turns it in his fingers like a coin, judging weight, balance, sharpness. The room is quiet except for the tick of a wooden clock and the occasional sigh of wind against the shutters. You feel the weight of history here, not in books or battles, but in this exact moment, where comfort is found in the hands of someone who can bleed you just enough to let the bad out. Barbers weren't just barbers in the 1700s, they were surgeons too. Not always by choice, but certainly by opportunity. Trained not in schools, but through apprenticeship and error. They worked on bones as easily as beards. Their shops were where men came to be made whole, or at least stitched well enough to keep walking. Outside, someone passes by the window, then hesitates. You hear the door creak again. Another soul. Another wound. The barber doesn't rush. He finishes sharpening the blade against a worn leather strop, the rhythm slow and certain. You wonder how many people have sat here, how many stories leaked out into the air, while blood drained into bowls, while teeth were pulled, while limbs were wrapped. You think of all the silence too, because not everyone screams. Some just breathe. Some just nod. And you understand now why the pole spins. Not for decoration, not for tradition, but because it has always turned since the day someone realized people feared stillness more than pain. The barber speaks at last, voice low and scratchy like an old record turning too slow. He asks what you need. You say you're not sure. He nods. Most people aren't. That's why they come. Outside, the pole turns, red over white, like a slow-motion memory you're not sure you want to keep. You're still in the chair. The leather has conformed to your shape now, cradling you like a weary friend. The barber moves around you, gathering items with the unhurried grace of someone who's repeated these motions 1,000 times. You notice a brass bowl placed carefully on the stand next to you. It's already half filled, not with water, but blood, rich and dark, its surface catching the flicker of candlelight like wine in a trembling glass. He hums as he works, a low tune without melody. The kind of song that doesn't soothe so much as distract. A kind of background to what's about to happen. You glance toward the far end of the shop, where a leather strap hangs from the ceiling. You've heard of it before. That's what they tied your arm to years ago, when you had too much heat in your head, or your humours were unbalanced, or your thoughts too sharp to be safe. Bloodletting, a word that floats somewhere between medical and medieval. In the 18th century, it was still standard practice, considered a cure-all for fevers, infections, and even bad moods. The idea was simple. Too much blood meant too much heat, or pressure, or passion. So the barber cut you open and let it out. He gestures for your arm. His fingers are warm, calloused, not cruel. He finds the vein quickly, without fumbling, and wraps the cloth tight above your elbow. Not tight enough to hurt, just enough to remind your body that something is coming. You don't flinch when the lancet pricks your skin, just a pinch of pressure and then warmth as blood runs down in a slow, obedient stream. The bowl makes a soft tapping sound as each drop lands. As your vision shifts, not from blood loss but from the strange intimacy of the act, you notice the shelf above the sink. Jars line it, filled with cloudy liquids and floating things, leeches, fat, slick, black things writhing lazily in confinement. The barber used them often, especially when the vein didn't cooperate. He'd place them on the skin, let them bite, and let them suck. They worked slowly, precisely, nature's little surgeons, chewing through skin with the delicacy of a violinist. In those days, people believed leeches could balance the humours better than knives. They were less violent, less messy, but somehow more disturbing. You could feel them working. You could feel their hunger. The barber doesn't use leeches on you tonight. You're grateful. He watches the blood drip, measures it not by volume, but by instinct. He knows when to stop, when enough badness has left your veins to make room for calm. And there is calm, surprisingly. Your limbs feel lighter, your thoughts softer. It's not medicine, not really, but it feels like it. As he presses a cloth to the cut and ties it with a strip of linen, he tells you in his gravel voice about the barber surgeons of old, how they travelled with armies, how they opened skulls and stitched up musket wounds without flinching, how they were trusted more than doctors in some towns, because at least barbers didn't talk down to you while they carved. You nod, because you've heard stories too. Of barbers carrying buckets of ears after battle. Of men lining up outside shops not for a shave, but to remove a bullet, or drain a boil, or even have a finger taken off. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. And here, in this quiet room where history still lingers in the corners, it doesn't feel so distant. He takes the bowl and pours the blood carefully into a pail. You expect revulsion, but there is none. This is a place where bodies are known, where mess is part of the service, where pain is as common as shaving cream. As he washes his hands, he tells you something strange about how in France, barbers once had a monopoly on surgery. Doctors weren't allowed to cut, two beneath them. So it fell to barbers to do the actual work, while the educated men gave orders from a distance. Imagine that. You come in for a beard trim and leave with a kidney stone removed. And yet, Somehow it worked. The candlelight burns low. The room feels smaller now, not in a claustrophobic way, but in a wrapped-in-wool kind of way. You feel held somehow by the space and its rituals. The bloodletting has ended. The barber hums again as he folds the cloths and puts the blade away. Outside, the striped pole continues to turn, slow and solemn, as if it too is exhaling. You breathe, you're lighter, not cured maybe, but relieved. And that, for tonight, is enough. The curtain at the back of the shop stirs. A knock, soft and deliberate. The barber glances over but doesn't hurry. He wipes his hands on the edge of his apron, then nods toward the doorway with the familiarity of someone who's seen every kind of person pass through it. You watch as a young boy enters, no older than 15. His eyes dart around like a trapped mouse, and under one arm he carries a bundle of cloth. As he unwraps it, the contents glint in the candlelight. Razors, clamps, scissors, and one long needle with a handle fashioned from dark wood. The barber inspects them, one by one, testing edges against his thumb, listening for the right sound, the whisper of sharpness. This is the apprentice's job. You realize it as he kneels, setting out the tools on a folded cloth like offerings. The blades are not sterile, not in the modern sense. They've been rinsed, sharpened, perhaps wiped with a bit of alcohol, or passed through flame if time allowed. But cleanliness here is more about custom than caution. You're invited behind the curtain, just a glimpse, just enough to see what most clients never do. The back room is dim and small, with a single shelf of rags, herbs, and corked bottles. A heavy wooden table stands in the center, its surface slick with beeswax and wear. On a hook nearby hangs a leather strap darker than any belt you've ever seen, not from dye, but from decades of use. The floor slants slightly for drainage. You understand what that means. This is where the barber becomes something more. Not a groomer, not a conversationalist, but a surgeon. Barber surgeons in the 18th century weren't allowed to perform every kind of operation, but they did most of the ones people actually needed. Boil lancing, tooth pulling, tumor cutting, setting bones, trepanation, removing parts of the skull. All of it done here, behind the respectable front of hair tonics and straight razors. The apprentice fetches a whetstone. You watch as he draws the razor across it, slow and rhythmic. Not too fast, not too light. He's learning not just skill, but pace. The calm that must never break, even when the skin does. The barber tells you about his training, how he learned not from books, but from men who knew things by feel. There was no licensing, no exams. You earned your stripes by surviving your mistakes, by not fainting, by not crying, by doing what needed to be done, even when your stomach tried to crawl up your throat. One of the first things he learned, he says, was how to calm a person without medicine, how to talk gently, hold steady eye contact, and time your movement with their breath. Pain could be endured if wrapped in calm. Panic was always worse than the blade. You think about that as he holds up a curved knife to the candlelight and studies it, as if it might tell him a secret. Some of these tools have been handed down through generations, sharpened, repaired, used on hundreds of bodies. They're not just metal, they carry memory. And not all those memories are clean. He points to a chisel with a nick in the blade and tells you how it came from a battlefield, used to remove a musket ball from a boy who lied about his age. The boy died, but the tool remained. It always does. You begin to understand why the front of the shop is so carefully curated, why the mirrors are gone, why the pole turns. All of this, everything about the space, is meant to manage how you feel, to make what's about to happen seem ordinary, manageable, familiar. Because the truth is, surgery wasn't sterile, wasn't clean, wasn't painless, but it was necessary, and it was fast. Barbers prided themselves on speed, not out of cruelty, but mercy. A limb could be off in under 2 minutes. That wasn't clumsiness, it was precision born from terror and practice. The apprentice hands back the razor. The barber doesn't speak. He just tests it once more, then wraps it carefully in cloth and places it in a drawer. Behind you, the curtain sways again. The front door has opened. Another visitor, another reason for steel to meet flesh. You return to the main room. The chair is still there, waiting for someone else. The pole outside spins. It has seen more than you can imagine, but it keeps turning. You return to your seat, the worn leather now cool beneath you, as if shrugging off the warmth of the last body. The barber places the razor aside. His movements have the quiet dignity of a man used to switching roles. Host, healer, handyman. He doesn't announce what's next. He simply continues. The bell above the door jingles again, a little sharper this time. A man enters holding his jaw, face flushed, lips tight with the kind of pain that makes sound feel useless. His clothes are fine enough. Wool waistcoat, brass buttons, gloves tucked into a pocket, but his manner is not. He's not here for fashion. The barber doesn't flinch. He gestures the man toward a side stool. A cracked bowl, a cloth, a wooden wedge for biting. You've seen that wedge before in drawings of battlefield amputations. But here it's for something more common, more frequent, more terrifying in its own way. A tooth needs to come out. In the 18th century, dentistry wasn't a separate field. It lived in the hands of whoever was brave enough to reach into a screaming mouth with iron. And more often than not, that person was your barber. Tooth pulling was messy, brutal, and often done in full view of the waiting room. It didn't require sterile rooms or reclining chairs, just a solid grip and a stronger stomach. The barber picks up a pair of pelican forceps, so named for their resemblance to a bird's beak. The tool is old, polished smooth from years of use, the metal curved cruelly to fit where it doesn't belong. He mutters something to the man, a reassurance, a request, a rhythm, and the man leans back, lips parted.
You don't watch the pull itself, you hear it. A sickening pop, a sharp exhale, a groan that curls into silence.
The barber drops the tooth into a jar. It lands with a dull tap, among others. Not a trophy, just record-keeping, like a guest book written in enamel. The man presses a cloth to his jaw, his fingers trembling slightly. But he stands, nods, leaves. No fuss, no payment up front. He'll settle later, or he won't. Either way, the barber will still be here. You glance around. There are other tools you hadn't noticed before. Tucked into a drawer are more forceps, some hooked, others flat and sharp. A bone chisel, a small mallet, instruments that look more suited to carpentry than care. And yet here they are, for teeth and tongues and the occasional fragment of jaw. On the wall behind the counter hangs a framed piece of parchment. It's not a diploma. It's a license of sorts issued by the guild. A symbol that this barber belongs to a brotherhood, men who cut, stitched and bled their clients with as much consistency as they shaved them. It doesn't mean he's a doctor, it just means he's not pretending. He tells you that some barbers used to tour fairs and festivals, setting up on platforms and pulling teeth in front of crowds. It was theatre. A man in a red coat, drawing blood while people laughed and clapped. Sometimes the patient was real. Sometimes not. Sometimes they fainted. Sometimes the barber fainted. He chuckles at that, a dry sound. Says it's not so different now, just fewer wigs and more silence. You notice a faint stain on the floor near the stool. It's shaped like a starburst, it's old, soaked into the grain like a tattoo. You imagine how many people sat here, holding their mouths, praying the pain after would be less than the pain before. And then, as if summoned by thought, the barber pulls out a tin and opens it. Inside, a collection of teeth, some yellow, some blackened, some oddly perfect. He says people used to save them. For luck, for selling, for stringing into necklaces.
You don't ask why.
He closes the tin and sets it aside. The tools go back into their drawer. The bowl of blood and spit is carried away. Everything returns to its place except the memory, which lingers. The room settles again, the pole spins, your fingers brush the arm of the chair, and you realize they're trembling. The barber sees it. He says nothing, just lights another candle, as if that's enough to hold the dark a little longer. The room is warm now, dense with waxy light and the quiet hum of oil burning calm. The air tastes faintly of iron and herbs, like something half-healed. You shift in your seat and notice a wet rag has been draped across the sill, pink-tinged, steam rising slowly from its center. There's nothing hurried in this place, only rhythm. A certain way of moving. A certain way of bleeding. The apprentice returns with a mop and bucket. He doesn't speak, but he nods to the barber, who gestures toward the floor near the stool. The boy begins to scrub, and you watch. There's no urgency, only practice. Like this is as natural as sweeping sawdust or polishing boots. The sound of wood and water blends with the creak of beams above, and for a moment you forget you're in a place of healing. Or hurting. Or both. The barber leans against the table and begins to clean a set of scissors, humming again. This time the tune is vaguely cheerful, oddly out of place, like something remembered from childhood. A lullaby for wounds. He tells you as he folds a cloth that barbers weren't just for the urban well-to-do. In port towns they were the first stop for sailors, men fresh off ships with broken fingers, cracked ribs, infected cuts from ropes and salt and God knows what else. Some would limp in with splinters the size of knitting needles in their thighs. Others would come half-drunk, soaked in rum and blood and salt water, demanding to be sewn up so they could return to the docks by nightfall. You imagine it now, a sailor sprawled across the bench, groaning, one eye swollen shut, a knife wound blooming beneath his shirt. The barber doesn't flinch. He works quickly, washing the cut with whatever liquid's on hand. Vinegar, gin, urine if desperate. Then threading a dull needle with twine. Sutures weren't fine things in the 18th century. They were thick, crude, and done fast. Infection was a risk, but so was waiting. The barber would pull skin together like cloth, tie it tight, slap on a salve made of beeswax and grease, and send the sailor back into the world with nothing more than a grunt. And that's assuming they weren't carrying something worse. The barber mentions the time a man stumbled in with a fever and boils under his arms. He didn't know it then, but it was the pox. Plague, perhaps, or something close. The man died 2 days later. The apprentice, just a child then, never showed up again. The barber doesn't elaborate, just tightens his grip on the scissors. Behind you, the apprentice finishes mopping. He rinses the cloth in the bucket, spills it outside the back door, then returns to hang it up. You wonder how many times that mop has been used, how many floors it has wiped clean of blood, bile, vomit, and whether it matters. The barber begins sharpening a new set of blades. You notice one with a broken handle, splintered where someone once gripped too hard. He doesn't discard it. He wraps it in cloth like the others. Sometimes the imperfect ones work best. He tells you another story, this time about a man who tried to pull his own tooth with a fork. Failed, of course. Split the gum and nearly choked on blood. Came into the shop gasping, fork still clutched in his hand. The barber removed the tooth, the fork, and the shame, all in one motion. You want to laugh, but you don't. It feels disrespectful somehow. These aren't tales for amusement. They're memories, instructions, warnings. As he sets the blades back into their tray, you notice something peculiar, a small jar with what looks like bone chips floating in oil. He catches your gaze and shrugs. Skull fragments, he says simply. Trepanation leftovers. You blink. Trepanation, the act of drilling a hole into the skull, done to release pressure or demons or bad air, depending on who you ask. Barbaric now, routine then. The barber claims he's done it 3 times. All survived. One became a preacher, one became a drunk, one left town and was never seen again. He says this without pride or regret, just fact. You stare at the jar, you can't look away. This place, this shop, with its ticking clock and turning pole, is more than a barber's space. It's a hospital, a confessional, a battlefield. And every story here is written not in ink, but in scar. The apprentice begins boiling water in a kettle. The steam curls up, ghostly and fragrant. You smell lavender, maybe mint, maybe something bitter underneath. He's preparing compresses. Someone else is coming. The door creaks.
You don't turn, you already know what you'll see.
Another person in pain, and a chair that never stays empty for long. The steam drifts lazily across the ceiling, warming the rafters and softening the edges of everything. Even the instruments, those stern little gods of steel and bone, seem gentler in the fog. The apprentice pours the hot water into a stone bowl, adding a pinch of dried flowers and crushed leaves. The aroma is sweet at first, then earthy, then sharp. You don't ask what's in it. You don't need to. The door opens again, this time slower. A man enters cradling his head like it might shatter. His coat is patched, eyes sunken, skin pale beneath a 5-day beard. The barber doesn't ask questions. He sees the signs, the tremor in the man's hands, the way he blinks as though the light is too loud, the telltale bruised swelling above his left ear.
Skull pressure.
You feel the air change. Even the apprentice stands straighter. The barber gestures to the long bench against the far wall, where the man lies down slowly, curling like paper, softening in rain. You watch, barely breathing, as the barber opens a separate case, a different kind of toolkit. The blades here are smaller, thinner, older, some still stained at the base, the kind of patina you can't scrub off with water or time. He selects a tool that looks more like a corkscrew than a scalpel. You know what this is? Trepanation. He doesn't call it that. He doesn't call it anything. No grand declarations, no drama, just sleeves rolled up, hands steady, expression unreadable. You want to ask how often he does this, but you don't, because the answer will only make you feel colder. Trepanation in the 18th century was surprisingly common for certain ailments, seizures, migraines, unexplained madness. The theory was that pressure inside the skull needed to be released. Let the bad air out, let the spirits escape, let the pain drain, like pus from a boil. And it sometimes worked. Not because the science was sound, but because the body, in all its stubbornness, sometimes survived despite the odds. The barber soaks a cloth in the herbal infusion, places it gently over the man's temple, then waits. Not long. Just enough for the skin to soften, the body to trust him. Then the cloth is removed and the corkscrew tool is pressed into place.
You don't look away.
It's not fast, not brutal. It's quiet, slow. The tool spins with a gentle motion, cutting through skin, then bone. The sound is not sharp, but gritty, like sand shifting beneath a door. The man groans once, then stills. A few drops of blood slip down his cheek, and the barber wipes them away as though brushing crumbs from a table. He removes the plug of bone, sets it aside, and leans in to examine the exposed tissue. No infection, no swelling, just pressure. He dabs the opening with wine, cheaper than spirits, but it does the trick, and covers it with a pad soaked in honey and lard, a poor man's antiseptic, rich in contradiction. And the man doesn't faint. He exhales, shallow and slow, and then he sleeps. The barber adjusts the blanket over him and steps back. Another job done, another soul halfway returned to peace. He tells you offhandedly that the tools were passed down from his grandfather, who trepanned French soldiers after the siege of Namur. He says the secret isn't in the drilling, it's in the stopping. Most men fail not because they cut, but because they don't know when to stop. You don't doubt him. The apprentice begins cleaning the tools in silence. He does not whistle. He does not look at the sleeping man. His hands are methodical, but his eyes are wide. You remember being young like that, watching the world do things your imagination had no name for. The barber returns to your side, says nothing for a while. Then he picks up the tiny disc of bone from the table, studies it in the candlelight, holds it between thumb and forefinger like a coin. He tells you people used to wear them, as charms, as proof. He's seen women sew them into sleeves, men carry them in pouches, a piece of themselves, cut free and carried forward. You wonder if the man will ask for his back. You wonder if he'll remember any of this. Outside, the pole still turns, unbothered, indifferent, like time itself, grinding forward in soft red and white spirals. The barber drops the bone into a small drawer lined with cotton. It lands with a whisper, and the room exhales. The man on the bench still sleeps, his breath shallow but steady, his pain somewhere far from here for now. You sit quietly as the barber prepares the next ritual, something gentler this time. A bottle is uncorked, its scent curls through the room like an old memory. Sweet, resinous, tinged with spice and something faintly burnt. The barber calls it his tincture. You watch him at his work table as he grinds a pinch of dried bark into a powder with a mortar and pestle. The sound is rhythmic, stone on stone, grit against patience. He adds the powder to the glass bottle, followed by a sliver of beeswax, a few drops of oil of turpentine, and what looks like crushed violet petals. Last, a small spoonful of alcohol, the strong kind used for lamps and wounds, and occasionally courage. This is medicine of a sort. Barbers in the 18th century weren't expected to create cures, only to offer comfort. Their tinctures weren't elegant solutions, they were kitchen alchemy, blends of what was available and what seemed to help. Willow bark for fever, camphor for breath, lavender for nerves, turpentine for infection, a bit of superstition for flavor. He tells you how one mixture came from an old woman in the countryside who swore it cured melancholy and nightmares. He tried it once. The man who drank it didn't sleep for 2 days, but afterwards said he'd never felt cleaner in the soul. You're not sure if that's medicine or magic, but you suppose there's little difference when it works. The barber pours the finished tincture into a small ceramic vial and sets it aside. He labels it in neat handwriting. For breath, for ache, for sleep. The label is already smudging, but it doesn't matter, the body doesn't read. He picks up another vial, this one already full, and hands it to you. You hesitate. It smells sharp, but not unpleasant. Like mint, if mint had been dragged through a forest fire. He tells you to take a sip. Not to swallow. Just to hold it. Let it sit under your tongue like a secret. It burns a little, then it warms, and then it soothes. You can feel it spreading through your gums, your cheeks, your sinuses, like a soft hand pressing a fever away from within. Your eyes water slightly, and the barber smiles as if to say, yes, that's how you know it's working. These tinctures aren't sold in apothecaries. They're not measured in proper doses, but they're remembered. Passed along in whispers and scribbled notes, in barbers' journals and widows' recipes. You imagine a shelf somewhere, generations deep, filled with unlabeled vials and the stories they hold. The barber turns his attention to a bundle of dried herbs hanging near the fireplace. He plucks a few leaves, mugwort, you think, and tosses them onto the coals. Smoke rises, rich and herbal, curling into the beams like prayer. He says some patients believe in the smoke, that it draws out illness or fright or the cold in the bones. He's not sure it does anything at all. but people relax when they smell it. And that's enough. You glance again at the man on the bench. He hasn't stirred. Sometimes the best medicine is time. Sometimes it's a room where nothing is asked of you, where someone else holds the blade, the bottle, the silence. The apprentice sets a small cup beside you, something warm, not strong, not sweet, just warm. You sip. It tastes of root and lemon peel, of rest, of forgetting. The barber places the tinctures back on the shelf. He wipes the mortar clean, folds the cloth, dims the lamp. You wonder how many people he's helped this way. Not by cutting, but by making space, by brewing silence and handing it to them in a clay cup. The wind rattles the shutters softly. The striped pole outside continues to turn, round and round, as it always has. As if it too has memorized the rhythm of healing. Not too fast, not too slow. Just enough. The barber sits at the edge of the table and lights his pipe. The smoke coils upward, mingling with the mugwort in a ghostly swirl. You breathe it in, and for the first time tonight, you feel a little closer to whole. The pipe's smoke lingers in the rafters like a forgotten hymn, curling into corners where breath slows and questions fade. You sit quietly now, watching the barber clean his tools again, not the razors or clamps, but the glass jars. He holds one up to the light, a round vessel filled with glistening black shapes.
Leeches.
They float, lazy and fat, in a liquid that looks like watered-down port. Some cling to the sides like drunks pressed against tavern walls. Others coil gently in motion, always in motion, even when asleep. He sets the jar down on the table between you and lets it rest, like a guest he's known longer than you. Leeches weren't just tools, they were co-workers, partners, in some cases the stars of the show. In the 18th century, physicians and barbers alike believed in their elegance. Unlike a blade, the leech chose where to bite. It followed the heat, the pulse, the invisible river of imbalance. You lean closer, they don't look like much. Short, slippery, almost mechanical in their simplicity. But the barber tells you that each one can drink up to 5 times its weight in blood, that they secrete an anticoagulant to keep it flowing, that, if left alone, they'll detach when full and fall away like an apology. He has names for some of them. That one, curled in the corner, Marie. The long one twisting through the middle, Baptiste.
It's half joke, half reverence.
Because leeches were not cheap. Good ones were imported, bred, trained in a sense, stored in cool, moist conditions, fed sparingly, never overworked. He opens a smaller jar and gently removes one with wooden tongs. It wriggles as he sets it in a porcelain dish where it begins to search, blindly, but with purpose. The barber tells you about a noble woman who insisted on leech therapy every week. She believed it kept her mind clear, her skin pale, her moods docile. He never asked if it worked. She kept returning, and her pulse stayed steady. That was enough. Leeches were used for everything: headaches, bruises, gout, even bad dreams. Some barbers placed them behind the ears to draw out sadness. Others applied them to swollen joints, angry rashes, or even the temples of people who spoke too quickly and smiled too much. You ask if it hurts. He shrugs, says not really, more like a burn followed by numbness. Some people found the sensation calming. Others fainted before the first drop. You stare at the leech in the dish. It wriggles forward, leaves a little trail of itself behind. You wonder what it remembers, what stories it's carried. The apprentice brings over another jar, smaller still, and uncorks it with a careful twist. Inside is a pale yellow salve, thick, oily, smelling faintly of garlic and smoke. The barber applies a dab of it to the leech's dish. It recoils at first, then pauses. He nods. This one's still good. He tells you about the time a fellow barber tried to store leeches in wine to preserve their spirit. They died within the hour. Another used milk. They bloated and burst. The lesson? Never assume the living can thrive in what comforts the dead. You sip again from your warm cup. The leech glides along the dish's edge, content. In a way, you envy its certainty. No questions. No doubt. Just instinct and appetite. The barber returns it to the jar, speaking softly, not words exactly, but the tone you use with a sleeping dog. He closes the lid gently and wipes the glass clean with a cloth that smells faintly of ash. You glance back toward the bench. The man is still asleep, his face turned to the wall, his breathing deep and regular. The compress on his temple has slipped slightly, but the barber doesn't move to fix it. Some things must shift on their own. The clock ticks softly. Outside, the wind rattles the pole, not angry, not afraid, just reminding the world it's still here. You sit back, watch the leeches drift like forgotten commas in old blood.
And for a moment you forget what century you're in.
The candle has burned low, its wax pooling at the base like a slow-motion collapse. Shadows stretch longer across the walls now, soft and golden, wrapping the instruments and jars in a kind of reverence. The barber moves through them with ease, his body a map of practiced routes. The door opens again. This time it's a gentleman. He's tall, refined, and clearly not here for a trim. One gloved hand presses firmly to his side, just beneath his ribs, and the way he moves tells you more than words would. He's hurt. Not mortally, perhaps, but deeply enough that every breath is a gamble. He says nothing at first, only removes his overcoat and lifts his waistcoat. The linen beneath is stained dark, not fresh blood, older, dry at the edges with a blooming centre of something still wet. The barber nods once and gestures to the long table. The gentleman obeys. You watch as he lies back, face turned to the ceiling, jaw tight with the restraint of someone who's been taught not to show weakness. He clutches a kerchief in one hand, not for blood, for dignity. The barber pulls up a stool and sits beside him, unrolling a fresh cloth of instruments. Curved scissors, a hooked probe, a few neatly wrapped needles, and a small pot of honey-yellow salve. You've seen this before now, the dance between pain and professionalism, but something feels different this time. There's a quiet respect in the way the barber lifts the linen, inspects the wound, and murmurs to the apprentice, "This man is no stranger, and no common drunk from the docks. He's someone who could afford other options, and chose this place instead. The wound is long and clean, too clean, a sword, perhaps, or a dueling knife. You don't ask, you already know. In the 18th century, honor often meant injury. Dueling was illegal, yes, but common among the upper class, settling insults with blood instead of words. The barber, of course, was the last step in that unspoken ritual. No questions, no judgment, just thread, tincture, and a promise not to mention who struck first. The barber cleans the wound with wine and a scrap of muslin. The gentleman winces but doesn't cry out. He stares at the ceiling, lips moving silently, perhaps a prayer, perhaps a curse. You can't tell. The barber applies the salve, made of lard, beeswax, and what smells faintly of juniper. He sews quickly with small, even stitches. His needle moves like it's following a line only he can see. The blood wells up, then stops. The skin closes. He finishes with a square of linen folded and pressed, tied tight with twine. The gentleman exhales sharply. Not from relief. From exhaustion. The barber steps back. No applause, no nods, just the sound of the thread being cut. As the man dresses, he thanks the barber in a low voice, not gratitude, recognition. Like a soldier thanking his comrade, not his doctor. A kind of mutual understanding, you didn't ask. I won't forget. The The door closes behind him and silence returns. The barber places the used tools in a shallow basin. He doesn't scrub them right away. He lets them rest. You ask about the ointment. He smiles, says it's one of his better recipes. Rendered pork fat infused with crushed juniper, honey, and dried marigold. The ingredients shift slightly with the season, but the result is the same. It keeps the wound moist, keeps the rot out, and smells faintly of something better than pain. He says the idea came from a sailor once, someone who saw the same mixture used on ship hulls to keep rot from spreading. One day, a man was stabbed aboard, and the ship's carpenter smeared the hull paste into the wound. It worked. Sort of. The sailor lived, that was enough. You sit in silence for a while, watching the basin fill with water from a copper kettle. The tools are submerged, left to soak in the warmth like old bones in a bath. The apprentice wipes the table clean. The room resets. Outside, the pole continues its quiet revolution, a sentinel of strange faith, turning in rhythm with the history bleeding out inside. You close your eyes for a moment.
Not asleep, not awake.
Just between, the hush in the room thickens, settling over your shoulders like a woolen cloak. The barber moves without needing to see. His hands know their places. His tools find their homes with the ease of old habits. You watch him drift toward a cabinet tucked in the corner, one you hadn't noticed until now. He opens it with a small iron key and withdraws a velvet-lined tray. This is not for hair. Laid out in solemn symmetry are the instruments of deeper surgery. Saws with bone handles, forceps that gleam cruelly in the candlelight, clamps with hinges worn smooth by years of turning. The barber doesn't touch them yet. He lets you look. You notice the way they're arranged, not by size or material, but by purpose. The saws on one end, the retractors in the center, the bone chisels curved and sharp on the other. There's a symmetry to it, like the layout of an altar. You don't need to be religious to feel the weight of it. He picks up a saw, short, straight, almost delicate in its proportions. Its teeth are small, filed inward rather than out. He explains that this one is used for fingers, hands, maybe a wrist if things go poorly. You don't ask when he last used it. You don't want to know. In the 18th century, amputation wasn't a last resort. It was often the only option. Gangrene didn't wait politely. Infections moved faster than prayers. If a wound festered too long, it spread up the limb like fire through dry wood. A hand today could mean an arm tomorrow. A week later, the chest, and then nothing. Speed was salvation, accuracy a bonus. He tells you of a man, a stable boy kicked by a horse, wrist shattered. By the time the boy arrived, the fingers were already black. They amputated to the elbow. He lived. Not well, but he lived. Another story. A chimney sweep who fell through a roof, crushed his foot. The barber removed it at the ankle, using only a belt for the boy's teeth and a hymn to distract him. When the lad woke, he asked for his shoe back. The barber laughs at that one, not cruelly, just the way you laugh when horror becomes history. You stare at the saw in his hand and wonder how many screams it remembers. Then he puts it down and picks up a hook, a small one, delicate, with a brass tip. He says it's used to pull veins aside when cutting near joints. He demonstrates, not on a body, but in the air, like a conductor marking time. You feel your stomach turn, not from revulsion, but from awe. The intimacy of it. The closeness. These tools weren't used in operating theatres. They were used in rooms like this, over candlelight, and the scent of mint and vinegar, with a child holding a lantern and a man praying through his teeth. The barber returns the instruments to their tray, one by one, each settled into velvet as if returning to bed. He closes the cabinet,
Locks it, and breathes.
Then he pulls out something else, something almost comical in comparison. A shaving brush, fat and soft, with bristles that smell faintly of lavender. He dips it in a dish of lather and begins to whip it into a froth. A man comes in, not injured, not desperate, just weary. He takes the chair without a word, tilts his head back and closes his eyes. The barber spreads warm foam across his cheeks. A fresh blade is drawn. The stroke is clean, gentle. A sigh escapes the man's lips. It's strange, you think, how the same hand that cuts through flesh with a saw can move so tenderly with a razor. But that was always the balance.
Barber, surgeon.
Comfort and consequence. You sit and watch the ritual, the tilt of the jaw, the stroke of steel, the slow unraveling of tension from the man's shoulders, and you think, maybe this was the real skill, not the cutting, not the sewing, but knowing when to do nothing more than soothe. The shave ends. The barber wipes the blade, folds the cloth, pats the man's face with a splash of rose water. The man smiles, nods, leaves. You don't hear his footsteps on the way out.
Outside the pole turns, always turning, as though nothing in the world has changed, and yet you feel it has.
You look at the locked cabinet and feel the key's weight in your imagination. The warmth in the room begins to settle into your bones, heavy and slow, like molasses poured in midwinter. You're no longer sure how long you've been here. An hour, a night, a century. Time in this place is less a straight line and more a slow spiral, like the barber's pole outside, eternally turning but never truly moving on. The bell above the door rings again, but this time it's not a patient. It's a visitor with a leather satchel and ink-stained hands, a medical student, judging by the worn cuffs of his coat and the eager tension in his eyes. He's come not for a shave, or a stitch, or even a story. He's come to learn. The barber greets him with a nod, respectful but cautious. There's always a divide between men who practice and men who study. The barber speaks with his hands, the student with his pen. The apprentice brings out a folding stool, and the student takes a seat, notebook already open. He asks questions rapidly, his voice sharp and curious, every word ending in a question mark too loud for this quiet space. What's the ratio of turpentine to honey in your wound paste? How many sutures per inch for a clean laceration? Do you sterilize your lancets between uses or rely on marble rinses? The barber answers some, others he ignores. You see the tension between them, old as medicine itself. The student comes from the new world of science and Latin, of hospitals with tiled walls and gas lamps and policies. The barber comes from the older world of steam and guesswork, of midnight knockings and trust earned by touch, not title. In the 18th century, this rift was growing. Surgeons, those from universities, were beginning to outpace barber surgeons in reputation and rank. Doctors wanted distance from the blood, they wore gloves and used silver instruments. They called the barber's tools crude, called the barber unclean. But when they needed someone to stop the bleeding, they still came here. The student observes silently now as the barber demonstrates how to knot a suture with a single hand. The technique is elegant, almost invisible, born not from study, but from hundreds of repetitions under pressure. The student tries it, fumbles, tries again. The barber doesn't laugh. Instead, he tells the student about an old barber in Lyon who could stitch a wound in complete darkness. Said that in war, you don't get candlelight. You get moonlight if you're lucky, screaming always, and a friend who might faint before you do. The student nods, takes notes, swallows pride. They discuss pressure dressings, then broken ribs, then how to drain a chest wound with a goose feather and patience. The student stops writing after a while, just listens. That too is part of the lesson. You wonder if this student will remember, if he'll carry these techniques into his clean halls and sterile gloves, or if he'll file them away as quaint, a footnote in the history of surgery. The barber finishes the demonstration, wipes his hands on a towel darkened by years of blood and lie. He looks at the student, not unkindly, and says, You can learn from books, but pain teaches faster. The student writes that down. He packs his satchel, offers his thanks, and leaves. The bell rings again, fainter now. You watch him through the window as he disappears into the fog. A shape swallowed by the street. By tomorrow. The barber turns to you, eyes softer than before. Not tired, just knowing. He doesn't say it, but you feel it. There will always be students, always someone new with clean hands and too many questions. And yet, there will also always be this place, this chair, this table, this pole that turns and turns, even as the world forgets. The barber returns to sharpening his blade, not for surgery, for shaving, steel meeting stone. Sparks that don't rise, just hiss. The sharpening stone sings with every stroke, soft and steady. It's a sound that barely exists, yet fills the room completely. You watch the barber work with the kind of focus you only see in men who trust their hands more than their eyes. Each motion draws the blade sharper, cleaner, not just for cutting, but for control. He doesn't look at you, but speaks anyway. Says it's not about the edge, it's about the hand behind it. You nod, though you're not sure if it's true. It sounds true, and that's enough. He sets the blade down and opens a drawer filled with folded paper packets. Each is labelled in a spidery hand, for fever, for cough, for nerves, for night sweats. He pulls one marked melancholy, unties the string, and pours a pinch of powder into a ceramic dish. You ask if it works. He shrugs. Depends on the person, depends on the moon.
Melancholy. The 18th century name for everything that haunted the soul but left the body mostly untouched. Sadness, lethargy, grief, a mind too heavy for its bones.
Barbers treated it, of course. Who else would? Doctors were for flesh and fever, priests were for sin, but barbers saw everything in between. He tells you about the barber who swore by mustard baths, said if you soaked the feet long enough, the sadness would drain out through the soles. Another used rose petals in brandy. Another prescribed walking backwards before dawn. All nonsense, maybe. But sometimes nonsense is medicine. He adds warm water to the powder and stirs. The liquid turns cloudy, then settles into a pale golden brown. He offers it to you in a chipped cup. You hesitate. Don't worry, he says. It's mostly sugar. You sip.
It's bitter, then sweet, then bitter again?
Like most things that try to heal you. The barber lights a small stick of incense. Its smoke rises in lazy spirals, adding warmth to the air. He says patients with melancholy preferred scents. Said the nose could lead the brain out of its fog if you gave it something to chase. He shows you a journal from the cabinet, worn leather, cracked at the corners. Inside, pages filled with delicate handwriting, notes about patients, a woman who refused to eat unless the curtains were drawn, a boy who laughed for hours, then wept when he touched metal, a man who came every week to have his beard shaved completely off, though he had none to begin with. No prescriptions, just observations, and beside each the treatment, honey with cloves, cold compress to the chest, a song played on a tin flute, a long walk with no destination. You run your fingers along the spine of the journal. It trembles slightly. The barber tells you about hysteria too, mostly women, though not always. The 18th century didn't know what to make of nerves. If you wept too often, or shouted too suddenly, or stayed too still, they said it was the womb climbing toward the throat. Nonsense, he says. But again, nonsense that sometimes helped. He reaches into another drawer and removes a small clay charm, shaped like a hand with an eye in the palm. Not medicine, not science, just something to hold, something to blame. People like to hold things when they didn't know what else to do.
He gives it to you.
It's warm from his fingers. You turn it over in your palm, feel the grooves worn smooth by generations of grasping. The apprentice returns with a bundle of dried herbs, lavender, chamomile, valerian. The barber nods and begins to tie them together with string. He hands it to you. You hang it by the bed, he says. It keeps the bad dreams too busy to find you. You almost laugh, but you don't.
Because maybe, just maybe, he's right.
You look around the room now with new eyes. It's not just a place of cutting, it's a place of holding, of witnessing, of remembering that not all pain bleeds. The man on the bench has stirred, the tree-panned gentleman. He sits up slowly, presses his hand to his bandage. He says nothing, just breathes. The barber nods. The man leaves. The wind pushes against the door for a moment, like a child testing a boundary. Then it quiets. The pole continues its spiral. Outside, night deepens.
Inside, something eases.
The door clicks shut behind the trepanned man, and for the first time in what feels like hours or years, the shop is empty. Not quiet, for the shop is never truly silent. There's the soft creak of wood settling under its own memory, the low hiss of candle flame, the whisper of air moving across tools laid with reverence. You shift in your chair. The barber wipes his hands on a clean cloth, slow and absent, like his thoughts are elsewhere. You follow his gaze to a framed sketch on the wall behind the counter, a faded charcoal drawing of a child with a lopsided smile and a long braid down her back. You ask. He answers, his daughter? Once. His voice doesn't rise or fall, just exists. She's gone now. Fever, he says, the kind that arrives on a damp wind and leaves nothing but silence. He couldn't save her. All the knives, powders, poultices, none of it mattered. He pauses, then adds, but her portrait keeps watch. You nod, you understand. The apprentice is sweeping in the corner. Not because the room is dirty, but because the motion helps. He's humming, off-key, the same 4 notes over and over. It's the kind of song that was never written down, passed from mouth to ear, to fingers on broom handles and aching hearts. The barber begins preparing a new mixture. This one is different. He brings out a small tin filled with something black and soft. It smells strong, pungent, sour, earthy, like rotting leaves after a storm. He mixes it with ash and vinegar in a mortar, grinding it slowly into a paste. The apprentice winces at the smell. This is a drawing salve, he explains, used to pull poison from wounds or draw heat from boils. The old name for it was black salve, and it had as many ingredients as there were villages: lard, pine pitch, clay, tobacco, garlic, soot, even spider silk in some places. He tells you a story, half fact, half legend, of a baker who scalded his hand so badly it split. The flesh bubbled and stank. The town doctor said to cut it off, but the barber packed it with this paste, bandaged it tight, and waited. The baker kept the hand, not pretty, but useful. The barber scoops a bit of the salve onto a cloth. The texture is sticky, stubborn, like tar. He folds the cloth carefully, then stores it in a ceramic pot lined with wax paper. You ask if it works? He says it depends what you're trying to draw out. He shows you an old case, a wooden box filled with small instruments used for boils and cysts, a curved lancet, a sharp spoon, a blunt probe. Each tool scarred with time, each handle worn from the grip of desperate hands. He picks up the spoon and tells you it was used on a merchant's back once. The boil was the size of a walnut and angrier. The man refused to sit down for 3 days. You don't ask for more detail, you already feel it. He shows you another tool, a fleam, used for opening abscesses. It looks like a miniature guillotine folded into brass casing. He demonstrates on the air, and the click of it makes you flinch. The apprentice watches, eyes wide, broom forgotten. The barber notices, hands the tool over, lets the boy hold it. It's heavy, too heavy for its size. The apprentice nods as if understanding something wordless. You wonder how many apprentices have stood here before, how many came to learn to shave and left knowing how to stitch, or how to stay very still when the screaming started. The barber speaks again, softly. He says that pain changes shape over time. What once made you scream eventually becomes something you describe in careful detail. Then a story. Then a whisper. Then a tool passed into someone else's hands. You look at the tools on the table. They don't shine, they glow. Outside, the moon has risen, pale and high. Its light filters through the warped glass of the window, laying crooked shadows across the floor like bent fingers. The pole turns. You wonder if it ever gets tired. You wonder if the barber does, but he just smiles.
And sharpens another blade.
The blade sings once more across the strop, slow even, methodical. It's not sharpening, not really. It's a ritual now, a rhythm to fill the space between stories, between ghosts. You sit quietly, hands folded, heart slowed to the room's strange beat. The apprentice has stopped sweeping. He's leaning against the doorframe now, arms crossed, watching the barber with the kind of silent devotion that doesn't ask for explanation. The bell does not ring, but there's a knock, soft, hesitant, the kind of knock that wants to be turned away but came too far not to try. The barber opens the door. A child stands there, barefoot, eyes red from crying, a small bundle clutched in both hands. It's a tooth, still slick with blood, root long and jagged. The barber kneels, asks nothing, just extends a hand. The child doesn't speak, but steps forward. The barber lifts the boy onto the bench and inspects his mouth, carefully, gently, as if it were a cracked teacup, rather than the pink cave of grief it clearly is. The child's cheek is swollen. Not with bruising, but infection. The kind that settles deep and dares you to chase it. You can almost feel the heat radiating off his jaw from across the room. The barber fetches a warm compress, linen soaked in a steeped brew of calendula, thyme, and a splash of vinegar. He presses it against the boy's face. The child flinches, then breathes. Not deeply, but enough. Tooth pain is an old enemy, a familiar one. In the 18th century, it was everywhere. No fluoride, no clean water, no understanding of bacteria. Just rot and sugar and time. Teeth fell out like regrets. Slow, sharp, always too late. The barber asks a question the child doesn't answer. He doesn't need to. The answer is written in the curve of his spine, the tremble in his fingers. He's scared. Not of pain, but of permanence. The barber sets the compress aside and checks the empty socket. It's raw but clean. The boy did most of the work himself. Whether through desperation or accident, it's already out. Now comes the harder part. The barber mixes a small poultice in a porcelain bowl, crushed clove, honey, and ground myrrh. He presses it gently into the empty space with the rounded end of a spoon. The child winces, then exhales. The pain will ease for now. The barber tears a strip of clean linen and instructs the boy to hold it in place. He does. He clutches it like a promise. Then, from a high shelf, the barber brings down a small wooden box. Inside are marbles, smooth glass, worn by time and fingers and stories. He lets the child choose one. The boy picks a green one, the color of grass after rain. He leaves without speaking. The barber closes the door behind him and locks it. You ask if he does that for all children. He shrugs, says sometimes the marble helps more than the medicine. Then he begins cleaning the spoon. You're struck, again, by the strangeness of this place. It holds so many shapes of pain, yet none of them are sharp here. Even the fear is softened, like bread left out in warm air too long. Chewy, familiar. The barber pours a bit of warm water into the basin and dips the bloodied cloth. You watch the red unfurl in the water like a spell breaking. He tells you that in some villages people kept lost teeth in jars on the mantle, said they held memories, or power, or simply proof that something once rooted had learned to let go. You wonder if the barber has such a jar. You wonder what he's lost. The apprentice speaks for the first time in a while. He says he used to be afraid of blood, not because of the colour, but the way it moved, like it knew where to go. The barber nods as if this makes perfect sense. You realise something then. This place isn't just about cutting and mending. It's about memory, about tending the invisible wounds that live behind the eyes, in the teeth, beneath the ribs. The barber wipes the basin clean, folds the cloth, sets the spoon in a fresh tray. Outside, the wind has stilled. The pole keeps turning, but without rush, like it knows you're listening now. Like it knows the story isn't over yet. The room feels smaller now, not from crowding, but from knowing. As though every story, every scream and stitch has gathered in the corners and tucked itself into the grain of the floor. The walls don't echo, they absorb. The barber moves with less urgency, though nothing about him has ever seemed rushed. He returns to the front counter and takes down a thick ledger. Its spine is cracked, its pages uneven, bloated by the years. He lays it open, and you see line after line of names, some full, some only initials. Next to each, a note. Abscess drained, fever watched, arm removed, patient survived.
He doesn't explain what you're looking at, he just turns the pages.
Each entry is a life, or the edge of one. And as he flips through, the faces begin to surface, not in drawings or words, but in the shape of the writing, the curl of the letters, the occasional smudge where someone coughed or bled or wept. There are dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all tended here, all under this roof, all watched over by a man who speaks little and listens more. Then he stops. He points to a name, the ink faded but unmistakable. A woman. Her entry reads, sewn at shoulder, stayed until spring. No ailment listed. No wound described. You ask about her. He smiles faintly and says nothing for a long time. Then she came in with a cut, stayed with a silent.
You don't press.
He tells you that not everyone who enters does so for the blood. Some come because this place is one of the few where you can sit, be seen, and not be expected to explain yourself.
That's the surgery too, he says. The part no blade ever touches.
The apprentice returns from the back with a small bundle, linen-wrapped, carefully knotted. He sets it on the table and waits. The barber opens it. Inside are letters, dozens, tied with old string. You see dates, 1739, 1742, 1751. Some in English, others in French, a few in Latin or something older. Each envelope is marked not with a name, but with a symbol, a crescent moon, a drop of water, a tiny stitched X. You ask what they are. Goodbyes, he says. From those who didn't make it, or did, or left something behind that couldn't be packed into a suitcase. Sometimes, the barber says, people need to write it down. Even if no one ever reads it, he keeps them always. One letter has no words at all, just a pressed flower, its petals long faded to brown. The paper smells of rosemary. He folds the bundle again, sets it back in its drawer, and locks it. Then he stands and walks to the far wall, where a row of portraits hangs, mismatched frames of every shape and kind. You hadn't noticed them until now. There's dust on the glass, but not neglect, more like memory allowed to rest. You stand and follow. There are barbers in these portraits, not all smiling, not all stern, just present. One wears a tall hat and holds a scalpel like a violin bow. Another stands beside a boy who might be an apprentice or a son. One portrait is simply of a hand holding a razor with no face attached at all. The barber touches one frame with his fingertips and tells you, that one never spoke. Cut clean and deep, but never said a word. You stare at their faces, their clothes change, their tools evolve, but the eyes are always the same. Eyes that have seen more than they've told, eyes that know the shape of pain and the soft, difficult weight of survival. You ask if he will have a portrait too. He doesn't answer. The apprentice coughs softly behind you. You turn. The table has been reset. A fresh cloth, a cup of water, a single rose petal resting beside a folded razor. The barber returns to his chair.
Someone else is coming, he says. Not a prediction, a certainty. He doesn't check the clock.
You listen.
And you believe him.
Outside, the moon continues its climb. The pole spins slowly now like a lullaby played on a phonograph that's nearly out of wind, and somewhere footsteps begin again. The footsteps come closer. You hear them before the bell does. A steady, dragging rhythm, as though the walker carries more than just their own weight. When the door finally opens, it's a soldier, or what's left of one. His coat is tattered, mud-streaked, too large in some places and far too tight in others. He doesn't salute, he doesn't even speak. He just leans against the doorframe for a breath too long, then stumbles forward, catching himself on the chair as though it were a comrade who wouldn't let him fall. The barber says nothing, just closes the ledger and rises. The soldier is young, barely out of boyhood, but his eyes have that dull, flat look you recognize immediately. They've seen things that language cannot contain. His lips are dry, his cheeks sunken. When the barber rolls back the sleeve of his coat, the arm underneath is discolored and swollen, streaked with lines that mean infection has already shaken hands with the blood. The barber signals to the apprentice, who fetches hot water and the cleanest blade. This won't be a wound they sew. It will be something else. Barbers in the 18th century were often the first line of defense in the face of disease. They treated soldiers fresh from campaigns where sickness was more lethal than swords. Gangrene, fever, septic limbs that pulsed with heat and shook with chill. The barber removes the coat gently, like peeling back time. The smell hits you first, rot beneath leather and brass. The shoulder is the source. A puncture wound, deep and purple, half covered in dried sap and battlefield bandage. Too late for cleaning. Too late for poultices. It will need to be opened. You brace yourself as the barber prepares the lancet. He dips it in alcohol, wipes it clean, and then, no fanfare, no hesitation, presses it into the swollen skin. The soldier doesn't scream. His jaw tenses. A hiss escapes through clenched teeth. Pus oozes out, dark and thick, and the apprentice silently passes a cloth. The barber works with speed, not panic. This is the routine. This is the familiar monster. He tells you, as he works, that wounds like this were often called king's evil, not because kings got them, but because people believed royal touch could heal them. He scoffs at that, says he'd rather have clean water and hot iron than the hand of any monarch. The soldier exhales, not from relief, just to remind himself he can. The barber packs the wound with dried moss and a blend of honey and salt. He binds it tight with linen and ties it with a sailor's knot. Not pretty, but strong. Then he sits and waits. You understand why. Sometimes the worst part comes after, the silence. The bodies shiver, the minds retreat. The soldier leans forward suddenly and vomits onto the floorboards.
No one flinches.
The apprentice fetches a rag. The barber wipes the soldier's mouth. No scolding, no shame, just care. Later, as the soldier lies curled on the bench, his bandaged arm resting across his chest like a white flag, the barber tells you something odd. He says the wound might heal, or it might not, but the touch, the cleaning, the cutting, it mattered either way. Not for the body, for the mind. To remind it that someone still sees it as worth saving. He leans back in his chair and lights his pipe again. The smoke this time is cedar sweet, curling up toward the ceiling like a forgotten prayer. You sit beside him, watching the soldier breathe. You don't ask his name. He doesn't offer it. It isn't needed. There's a peace here now, even with the blood and the smoke and the muffled sounds of pain, because something was done, not everything, but something. And that is what this place offers. Not miracles, but dignity. Outside, the moon is high. The barber's pole continues to turn, the shadows along its stripes stretching like the long fingers of sleep. You lean back and close your eyes, just for a moment. When your eyes open again, the soldier is gone. So is the cloth stained with his wound, and the shallow basin of water darkened by pain. The bench has been wiped clean, the floor mopped, the tools returned to their drawer. Only the scent of cedar lingers, faint now like smoke caught in the folds of memory. The barber stands by the window, arms crossed, watching the street. Nothing passes, just fog and the slow breath of a city asleep. You notice something has changed. A small, framed portrait now sits on the counter. It's unfamiliar. An older man in a double-breasted coat, white at the temples, chin lifted as though meeting the world halfway. You ask. The barber doesn't answer directly. He just says, "He taught me how to listen before I learned to cut." You understand. Barbers, especially those who also took up the surgeon's tools, were rarely remembered. No statues, no titles, but they taught each other. Passed knowledge not with degrees, but with scars. You imagine the man in the portrait reaching across a work table, guiding fingers to the right vein, whispering not encouragement, but rhythm.
"You don't stop when the blood comes," he might have said. "You stop when the breathing slows."
The barber places a hand gently on the frame, then turns to a drawer you've never seen opened before. Inside is a black book. No title. Just a flap of worn leather, held closed by a strip of twine. He opens it carefully. Inside are sketches. Not anatomical charts, not diagrams, portraits. Dozens of them, rendered in charcoal or ink. Some no more than gestures, others so detailed you can see the lines of exhaustion under the eyes.
These are patients.
But not in pain, not screaming. They're quiet, asleep, some smiling faintly. One has their eyes open but distant, like they're already partway gone. He flips to a page and lets you look. It's a woman with her hand on her cheek. You recognize the sadness in the curve of her spine, the kind of ache that doesn't bleed. You ask if he draws them himself. He shakes his head. They draw themselves, then smiles, just barely. He tells you how, sometimes when he can't sleep, he opens the book and flips through it. Not to remember the wounds, but the weight of care. The reminder that he was there, that someone let him help. The apprentice returns, holding a box wrapped in waxed cloth. He lays it on the counter and unties it. Inside are small objects, each resting in its own groove. Buttons, coins, thimbles, a locket with no picture, a wedding ring cracked down the middle. These were left behind, sometimes forgotten, sometimes offered, when someone had nothing else to give. You ask why he keeps them. The barber says simply, they were touched by pain. That makes them worth keeping. You pick up the locket. It's cool. Lighter than you expected. You close your hand around it and feel not sorrow, not peace either. Something quieter. Something in between. The apprentice watches you. He asks if you've ever thought of staying. It's not a job offer. It's a kind of question you ask only once.
You don't answer.
But you look at the table, the tools, the portraits, the poles still spinning outside, and you wonder what it would feel like to spend your life stitching the world back together, one thread, one tooth, one sigh at a time. The barber replaces the box, locks the drawer. Then he gestures toward the back room.
Not an invitation.
The torch passed. The back room is dimmer than the rest of the shop, as if the candlelight hesitates to follow you in. It smells of oil, dust, and something faintly herbal. Rosemary, maybe, or dried nettle. The barber doesn't speak. He simply lights a small lantern, sets it on the table, and gestures for you to sit. You do. The chair is simpler than the one out front. No leather, no armrests, just sturdy wood, shaped by countless evenings of waiting and working. It creaks as you lean back, not in protest, but in greeting. Across from you, the barber opens a cabinet. Inside, a handful of notebooks, a clean razor wrapped in oiled cloth, and a long wooden case with brass hinges. He opens it with the same care one might reserve for a prayer book. Inside lies a complete surgical kit, each instrument held snug in its velvet cradle, each piece with a name and a history. He doesn't offer to teach. He begins to demonstrate. First, how to fold a cloth so that it becomes a bandage, a tourniquet, a sling. Then how to pack a wound with moss, not loosely, not tightly, but just enough. He shows you how to cut through linen with one hand while holding pressure with the other. Not to stop the bleeding entirely, just to slow it long enough for the body to catch up. Then he places a small coin on the table.
A game, he says. He spins it fast.
And while it turns, you're to tie a knot in the suture thread with one hand without looking down. The first time you fail. The second you nearly finish. The third, your fingers remember. The barber doesn't smile, but he nods. He tells you about the ones who stayed. Apprentices who became surgeons, surgeons who became teachers, teachers who became something softer, like keepers of pain or midwives to relief. He never calls them heroes, just people who stayed when it was hard. You ask why he's still here. He runs a thumb along the edge of the razor. The steel glints. He says, because someone will always knock. You look down at your hands. They're not steady, not yet, but they're listening. The barber stands, walks to the cupboard, removes one final item, a candle, thick and white, never used. He lights it, sets it in the window. For the next one, he says. You look outside, the street is empty, the pole still turns. Slower now, almost reverent. The barber begins to clean, not the tools, the room. As he sweeps, as he wipes down the bench, the air seems to thicken with stillness, the kind that comes at the end of something. Or the beginning. You stay seated, and for the first time since you entered this place, you feel what the others must have felt. Not fear.
Not hope. Just presence. Here. Now.
With the scent of rosemary.
And steel. And time.
The candle burns lower now, its flame softened by the hush of a room that knows the end of stories. You sit still, the barber's tools resting nearby, the air filled with the quiet hum of sleep approaching. Every shadow in this place carries memory. A soldier's sigh, a child's tooth, the tremble of a patient waiting for the needle, the knot, the cut. The barber doesn't speak. He no longer needs to. You've heard his voice in every stroke of his razor, in every wrapped bandage, in every cup of bitter herbs pressed gently into shaking hands. Outside, the wind slows. The striped pole continues its eternal spiral, turning not for show, but for memory, of blood, of stitches, of care offered in silence. The apprentice has vanished into the darkened hallway, perhaps already asleep, perhaps dreaming of marbles and pressed flowers and copper coins laid on still tongues. You are alone and yet not. This shop is never truly empty. It holds too many echoes, too many unspoken names stitched into its walls. And you now are part of them, a witness. A story folded into the ledger, into the box of buttons and bent rings, into the quiet understanding that healing isn't always clean, or quick, or finished. You close your eyes. The air is warm. The floor creaks once. Somewhere in the distance another knock begins. But not for you.
Not tonight.
Tonight the wounds are still. Tonight the razors sleep. And so do you.